Let's talk about one of the most iconic types of clues in a treasure hunt, and it goes all the way back to the late 19th century with Treasure Island that popularized it. Of course, I'm talking about the treasure map, where X marks the spot, at least in the Treasure Island version. Now, treasure maps are a fascinating part of different types of game designs, including the treasure hunt. But one of the things that both designers and hunters can benefit from is taking some time, pausing, and realizing that there are many different types of maps. And taking the time to understand the type of map you're working with or that you want to create can create a much more rich experience. As a hunter, it can help you figure out the clues more easily and progress further into the hunt. If you're a designer, it can help you create more rich, vibrant, interesting, intentional maps to be part of your hunt. So with this in mind, I'm going to take you through 7 different types of treasure map. And by the end, my hope is that if you're a designer, you walk away with some new ideas and possibilities for your future plans and clues. And if you are a hunter, you're going to be able to look at maps in treasure hunts with more nuance. And you'll be able to use this framework to try to ask the question, what type of map am I looking at? Now, it's not this easy, of course, because oftentimes a map can be more than one type, and one gets layered on top of another. But what I've found is that with almost all treasure map designs, there is a predominant, a foundational map type. And then after that's been developed, there can be layered, another map type can be layered on top of it. So with that in mind, let's dive into these 7. I hope you stay through all the way through and check these out, and then you can give me your feedback, and I'll see if I can refine and build on it in future videos. First one is the literal geographic map. In other words, it is a map of a specific place, of roads, trails, whatever it might be. Of course, this would be easy if it were labeled, but in a treasure hunt, it's rare that you would find a treasure map that tells you exactly what it's a map of. So that's the first question that someone's asking if you're dealing with a literal geographical map is, well, what is this of? It could be a zoomed out picture of an entire trail like the Appalachian Trail, and it could be zoomed in all the way to a square quarter mile of one portion of one trail and one park in one state and one region. You get the idea. So a literal geographic map can have some misleading elements to it, and it certainly has some mystery to it. Also, with a literal geographical map, it's not uncommon for them to make it a mirror image or to shift it. So north is south or north is southeast or something like that. And playing around with scale is a common tool for designers of treasure maps as well. So it may be zoomed in to a more narrow area than you think, or zoomed out to a much broader area than you think. So all of that is part of trying to decode a literal geographic map. So then let's dive to the second one, which I would call a stylized fantasy map. Now this is a drawn or fictional map that makes up a made-up space. So it's not a map to a real place. So how is that useful in a treasure hunt? Well, it's useful because the map is telling some kind of story. It's introducing you to an imaginary world, and there may be clues hidden in that imaginary world that lead you to a real place in some way or another. So the tactic of reading a fantasy treasure map is to try to decode the symbols, to realize that distance is going to be represented in a creative way, and to look for metaphor and meaning that can have value for you in the treasure hunt. Third one would be a symbolic or allegorical map. So these are maps where locations represent ideas or virtues, or vice versa, where ideas or stories or images represent locations. So this would be, for example, in the John Collins Black, where there's treasure inside. Many people assume that this map has, some think that it has a geographical component to it, but it may also have a symbolic allegoric map component to it, because there are all these little images. So what do those images represent? Does the image tie directly? For example, if there's an image of a dog, is there a place that's called Dog Hill or something like that? So it could be that literal, or it could be a little bit more figurative, but it's hinting toward a certain geographic location or space or something like that. So a symbolic or allegorical map requires you to try to understand you have to take some time and try to understand how imagery and allegory is being used in the map. And it's going to be used almost always, it's going to be used consistently within the map. Even if the larger story of the treasure hunt dives into different themes and myths within a specific map, it's pretty common that the map designer is going to use the same sort of the same language to talk about things. So if you have one image of an animal and it represents a specific geographic location, there's a good chance that most of the other items are going to follow that same logic and same line of thinking. They could mix it up. They could twist it around where in one case an image represents the name of a specific location and the other, the image represents, let's say, the image represents a kind of perspective that you have to take in order to use the map. That's possible, but generally they try to stay with the same logic. So the fourth one would be a puzzle-based map. So this map, the map is a puzzle. Decoding it reveals where to go or what to do. So that means that in these maps there are usually ciphers hidden, there are coordination systems, there are grid overlays, so you might have two different maps and you have to put them on top of one another. You might have to look at the map through different glasses to see portions. There could be invisible ink. So there's more of a puzzle component to the map, and you need to be able to figure that out in order to understand the map. Or it could be that the map is not oriented properly, and there are some kind of clues that help you learn how to orient it so you know what is north, east, south, and west. Or the coordinates are some kind of cipher, and you have to work out the coordinates so that you understand them correctly. You get the idea. So your role if you're dealing with a puzzle-based map is to solve the puzzles within the map so then you can see it more clearly, understand it more concretely. The fifth one then would be a fragmented or modular map. This is where the map itself is broken up into a series of pieces. And what would be common is in a clue chain treasure hunt, you might be given a clue to a location and that you get a piece of the map, and then there's a clue to a next location, and that gives you a second piece of the map, and you piece it all together, and finally you gather all the pieces, you put it together, and it reveals a full map. Now, is that full map a geographical map or an allegory metaphor map or something else? Well, once you have the full map, you can try to figure that part out. But a fragmented or modular map, that's what it does. It breaks it into pieces. A sixth one would be temporal or movement map. So the map is a set of time, steps, actions, or movements through space. Now, usually with this kind of map, you're given a map and there would be pictures that might do 10 steps. Like you'd have a picture of a rock and a mountain, and it shows 10 or 100 steps. It even has the number 100, or it has 100 little foot marks or something like that. So the symbols in the map are related to the kinds of things you have to do. Look up, look down, turn to your right, take this many steps. So there's a logic or a rhythm. It's like the map is teaching you how to do a physical dance to the final location. In some way or another. And those can be kind of fun and interesting. And then the last one would be a narrative-driven map. And narrative-driven maps often are not physical maps at all. They can be hidden within a poem or within a book or a story. And so it's describing how to get from one place. Think of this like written instructions on how to get from where you are to the grocery store. So as opposed to them giving you a visual map, they're going to give you written instructions. So a narrative-driven map works like that. Of course, it's usually hidden within clues and mysteries and riddles and other things like that. A common design for a narrative-based map would be to use like a 5-stanza poem. And the first stanza might introduce you and remind you of the treasure hunt that you're on. The second stanza might introduce you to maybe a character that's going to be part of giving you a hint to the direction. So it might, maybe it's Abraham Lincoln, and it's written in almost a riddle format in the second stanza, and it doesn't tell you it's Abraham Lincoln, but it's leading you to discover that what they're talking about is Abraham Lincoln. And then in the third stanza, it might give you a broad area, and so maybe that stanza is talking about Illinois. And so but it doesn't tell you that it's Illinois. And then the fourth stanza zooms in even more, and that might be about Springfield, Illinois. And then the fifth stanza tells you specifically how to find it. So now you've narrowed it down. You know that somehow the treasure is in Springfield, Illinois, and the fifth stanza takes you home and gives you more details. And maybe the clues are to the museum of Lincoln's home in Springfield, Illinois, and somehow it's hidden in the backyard or something like that. This is not a real, that was not real. I was just making that up for the sake of an illustration or example. But that's how a narrative-driven map works. And so I would suggest that when you're looking at a poem, it's good to try to understand how is the poem being used. Is the poem just being used to give you a chain of single-word clues? Is the poem actually some kind of narrative-based map? It's just something worth looking at. Now, as I said before, when you're dealing with maps, treasure maps, a designer usually has one predominant map type in mind when they start their map design. And then as they create their map, they might add some complexity by putting another layer. So they might start with a geographical map concept, and they're going to be really zoomed in or out, and they've got that figured out. And then on top of it, they use sort of metaphors or allegories, little images, to give you clues to narrow your search to a place so that you can finally discover what that visual map is representing. But you'd have to be really zoomed in to understand it and for it to make sense. So there you go. There are 7 map types. I hope you find this useful, whether you are a treasure hunt designer or you are one of those treasure hunters and searchers.